Hey, folks, greetings from the Offensive Security Group here at Secure IT 360, coming at you with a new episode of the Cyber Threat Perspective. You've got myself, Brad, and Mr. Spencer here. Today, we're going to be talking about making penetration test results actionable. And so we're going to kind of discuss the challenges associated with translating those findings into practical and effective security improvements and implementations. And we're going to get into the bottlenecks, at least what we think or perceive as bottlenecks to resolution when it comes to pen test reports and their findings. And so, Spencer, this was kind of your brainchild. And so I'd be really interested to hear what your thought process was in putting this episode note and its notes together.
Yeah. So the core of this discussion is sometimes we'll do a pen test for a client. We'll come back a year later and we'll do the same pen test over again, and we'll have the same findings. The client will not have remediated many, if not, all of the findings, or none of the findings rather. And, that happens a few times, and they're like, I wonder what the problem is, or I wonder what, was it our report? Was it the findings? Was it something else? What is the reason why there are these repeat findings, over and over again on some engagements that you do, right? And I think everybody who has done a pen test and everybody who's received a pen test has experienced this, right? Like, this inherently is not a bad thing to have repeat findings. But I wanted to kind of understand more of why this happens and kind of put some thought process around it, and maybe help those listening who are an IT director, a CISO, or if you're in a position of leadership, or even if you're a sysadmin, right? Help understand what are the bottlenecks, what are the reasons why, findings don't get remediated or issues don't get fixed from one year to the next, or from one period of time to the next, and kind of help, from our background and our experience, Brad, on, what are some things you can think about? What are some strategies to help, prioritize those findings to get them fixed? So they aren't, holes in your environment or gaps. So that's kind of the core of this episode.
No, I love it, man. It's something that I don't think is talked about often enough, because what you describe is a common occurrence in our line of work. I see it especially on web apps, mobile apps, things like that, where there are maybe parties responsible for fixing things that are not also involved in the pen test. And that is, I'm sure, is the case on external, internal as well, especially probably external, maybe. It just comes to mind because a lot of the resources that we test against maybe aren't on-prem, maybe
Yep.
they're cloud or SaaS or whatever. And so there's this kind of distributed workload, if you will,
Yep.
that has to be managed. And I think that is one of the big challenges for folks, right? And I've been very fortunate in my career to have strong leadership that prioritized risk based on what I want to call it real risk, right? But I
Right.
feel like that's a little ambiguous. But what I mean by that is what things are actually posing material risk to my organization. And we've talked about this ad nauseum over various
Yep.
episodes, prioritizing what's actually a problem. And I think this kind of falls into that category a little bit. But
Yep.
I really like what you've broken down here with regards to, understanding why it's not fixed, and then
Yep.
maybe solving it. So
Yep. Yeah. So the kind of the first step I thought we'd talk through is, why is pen testing important? I think that is kind of a self-explanatory in some way, shape, or form. But if for those that are listening
I
that
don't think it
are
is.
unsure of the value, right, or unsure of the importance of pen testing, Brad, you put this very nicely the way you explain it with web apps. For internals, I like to think of, finding a needle in the stack of needles. There are other analogies, but there are many things in internal environments, especially with an Active Directory, with things related to permissions or certificates or logon scripts. There are unlimited number of things that you will never find, you will never identify as being a risk if you don't, A, know where to look, and B, know what to look for. And the only way you're going to find that is somebody who has experience finding that thing, right? Like, that's the only way. Or you get a tool that somehow is able to find that. But as we know, there are significant weaknesses in just vulnerability scanning alone. So that's important. That's, to me, why pen testing is important. And I think For those that haven't heard your analogy, I think it's really great to hear that perspective as well, because it's even simpler than my analogies.
Oh, you mean the button analogy
Yeah,
that
the
I use
button.
all the time? Yeah. Okay. So, and I translate most things into web app pen testing because that's my specialty. That's, what I've been doing for the longest and most time. But, if you were to take a web app vulnerability scanner, and there are many of them out there, many of them are great, and scan a website, and if there's a button on the front page of that website that says hack me in big red letters, the scanner is not going to find that, right? Because it's built in intended functionality to the application. Whereas any human being with, reasonably good vision can look at that website and be like, oh, well, that's a problem. That shouldn't be there. And so that's kind of the contrast with regards to vulnerability scanning, especially in the
Yep.
in the web app world, right? But I
Yep.
think it translates across all types of penetration testing.
Yep. Yeah. Now, one of the reasons I kind of thought of in my head of like why these findings don't get remediated is something that I didn't plan to talk about because I wanted to focus on more of the core issues. But I'll just mention that the initial knee jerk place that I went to is like, well, maybe some pen test reports aren't good, right? Like maybe they're just not good. And while that is probably true, they're probably less good, inferior pen test reports in some way, shape, or form. A lot of it, I think, is more internal struggles, right? Internal
I
to
think
the
so.
team that is receiving that pen test, and that's really what I wanted to focus on. So kind of the common challenges that I thought of is like, okay, why are these remediations hard to implement, or why are these fixes hard to implement? And I kind of came up with three kind of areas that I wanted to talk through. And those are lack of resources. So that would be, lack of human resources, like human people to do the work.
Mhm.
And then resources in terms of capital. So the money to spend to invest into a tool or somebody to help fix that thing, or whatever. So lack of resources is one thing I think we can all agree on. Lack of
Yeah.
expertise is another area. So you might have the people, you might have the money, but you don't know where to point them. You don't know, where to fix the thing or how to fix the thing. And so that's the second area. And then the third area is just lack of time. Maybe you have the expertise, you have the people, you have the money, but you don't have the time, right? You can, leverage the other things to increase the amount of time that you have. Like you can spend money to hire people to get the time. But those are kind of the three areas I thought would be good to talk through in the context of this. How do you make pen test results actionable?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I'll probably talk more about this in the expertise section, but all of these things assume that it is your intention to fix these issues, right?
Right.
And I gotta say, man, that there's more than a small percentage of pen test clients that we have that just, I don't know if they
Right.
don't care or don't understand or choose not to. Maybe
Yep.
it's some combination of those things. I'm just not sure. But yeah, we'll get into that for sure.
That's a good point. Is something we didn't mention initially is the compliance requirements around pen testing, right? A lot
Mhm.
of frameworks now have pen testing requirements
Mhm.
around security programs and in their frameworks,
Yep.
and those frameworks don't say you have to fix the findings. They just say you need a pen test.
Yes.
And if I'm reading between the lines a little bit there, a lot of the legislation just says you have to have certain types of engagements done. You have to do vulnerability
Yeah.
scanning. You have to have a CISO. You have to have a pen test. Like all these things. But to your point, they don't necessarily say you have to fix the things. You don't necessarily say you have to have a good pen test. What even is a good pen test? So
Right.
I think there leaves a lot of room for error as a result.
No, I completely agree. And, I understand the struggle from a lack of resources perspective, right? Just purely putting a management hat on for a few minutes.
Yep.
We have to prioritize certain things. And I will tell you, a lot of our clients who have all the motivation in the world to get these things fixed. And we're working with one right now. We were talking about them this morning. Their folks were out for various reasons, and they
Yep.
also have internal projects like major migrations and other really important things. At
Yep.
the end of the day, businesses are not security shops,
Yep.
right? And so their primary focus is to be profitable and to supply whatever service it is that they supply. It's not to be the most secure company in the world. And so I kind of understand that, right? So when we're applying these resources across all of the million things that I know everybody has to do, But
Yep.
I think it comes back to, and I'm going to beat on this drum the entire episode, so just prepare yourself. It just comes back to leadership prioritizing based on how important they think it really is. And that has to do with the risk appetite of an organization, right? For those of you that don't understand what that means, there are some companies out there that have a higher risk appetite versus a lower. And what I mean by that is a financial institution, for example, has a very low risk appetite. They don't want to do anything that's going to jeopardize their ability to do business because it is so important and it
Mhm.
impacts so many people's lives. By contrast, you might be a development shop that puts out code for TVs. Actually, one of our clients does that. And who's attacking TVs for the most part, right? Maybe some nation states, maybe some script kiddies, but not. It's not a huge target, and therefore they may have a much higher risk appetite. So understand those allocation of resources have
Yep.
to take those things into consideration, which probably sounds a little weird coming from a security group because we're like, fix all the security things. You have to have, the highest level of
Yep.
security possible, but that's just not always realistic.
Yep. Yeah, and one of the underlying, arguments for that is, our reports are recommendations, right? Like
Yeah.
these are not prescriptive things that like you have to implement, right? Who are we to say you have to implement these fixes or these controls or these remediations,
The
right? So these
experts.
are yeah. So these are recommended recommendations, right? They're recommended fixes for these things.
Yeah.
But I saw this too, and you saw this as well in the financial industry. Is like you have audits. Like when there's an audit, there's really nothing getting done, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially in insurance, where there are regulatory auditors that they literally come into your office, your building, your office, and they're auditing you for several months at a time.
Yeah.
There's no real big projects going through that because they're auditing things. They're going through a lot of processes that involve a lot of different people. So the human capital, right, or the human resource time, is a factor, right?
It is.
Especially with small teams. A lot of the firms that we work with have small IT teams. Maybe they don't have dedicated IT staff, so the IT admin, the network admin, the sysadmin, they're all like keeping the lights on, patching things, doing their own projects, and they have to worry about the security stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So it can be difficult, right? It's difficult to prioritize or know what to prioritize. And so if you're catching on, a lot of these things kind of blend together, right? You have to
A
have
lot
the
of overlap.
resources, but you have to have the expertise to know where to point the resources to be able to prioritize. So all these things are intermingled and interrelated. But having resources is a big thing, right? If you have people to throw at the problem, you can at least get some of the way there. You can make some progress.
Yep. But inevitably, and I've never been in anywhere in an IT shop that this wasn't true, there's always more work to do than there is time and people, right?
Yep.
And so, it just does come down to managing those resources
It's one of
appropriately.
those things like you have a project and your I forget what the saying is, but your effort essentially expands or contracts based on the amount of time that you have to work on something. And the same with money, right? When you're budgeting or when you're working on a project, if you have X dollars, you're going to most likely spend that X dollars. If you have half that, you're going to spend half of that. So your project and what you spend versus, for time and capital is going to expand based on whatever your requirements are.
Absolutely.
So some things that I think might help for in the context of lack of resources. And Brad, I'm curious what you think. But obviously you can hire out, right? You can hire third parties to help with remediation, with fixing things, putting boots on the ground. If you have the money, maybe you can hire people to kind of help supplement your IT team to help fix some of those things.
Yeah, man, I think it's a great idea, right? Because it affords you the luxury of expanding and contracting the workforce based on your needs. And, if you're spending an FTE or a full-time employee's salary's worth of these third parties to bring on board to help you solve problems, then you've just justified
Yep.
a staff ad at that point, right? And so, but if it's a short-term thing, bring in an MSP, man.
Yep.
Spend $20,000, $30,000, whatever you need to do to solve this problem in the short term, so that you're not sitting there, eating this risk year over year, like you
Yep.
described in the opening, of this episode.
Yep. Another thing I think is important too is leveraging a pen test firm. Particularly if you have a pen test done, right? There's all these remediations and findings. Leverage their expertise to help understand how to mitigate those things. Maybe you can meet with them and
Yeah.
talk about the findings, talk about what the recommended remediations are, kind of talk through what the impact is of those changes potentially. A lot of pen testers, especially internal pen testers like me, have like IT, sysadmin backgrounds. So if you get a pen test from us, I'm very comfortable talking about what the impact might be of certain changes if you were to remediate them, right? So leverage third-party firms like that, whoever you get the assessment from, to kind of get some of that information to help make better decisions or better prioritize those findings.
Yeah. And I think you and I having the background that we do, kind of coming into this group, we understand the struggle with regards to having, just this tomb of pen test results dropped on your desk, and then the firm walks away, right? And so,
Hmm.
we have as part of the service that we offer. We offer retesting. We also offer assistance in remediation, not in the turning screwdriver sense, but like, hey, we'll get on a conference call with you, share your screen. We'll walk you through what you need to do to fix these issues, because at the end of the day, our goal is not to deliver a pen test report, even though that's technically like what the statement of work says. Our goal is to help you improve your security based on our
Hmm.
expertise and within the scope of the pen test that we're doing. And so
Yep.
very frequently we will get on the phone with clients and say, let's fix this together, let's work on this as a group. And what's great about that is you don't have to hire anybody, you don't have to retrain us, do any of this stuff. Just let us get on the phone with your IT resource that you already have, and we'll help
Yep.
you solve these problems. And like you mentioned earlier, kind of in passing, but I think it's a really good point, is we understand what the downstream implications of these changes are. I'll go back to web app pen testing, for example. Anybody on our team that does web app pen testing is also a developer, which means we can jump on a call with your dev team and tell them how to fix these issues in their code base, and we'll tell them how to prevent it from happening again, with the goal of remediation,
Hmm.
as part of the
Yep.
project. So if your pen test firm's not doing that for you, first ask them,
Yep.
because I have to imagine most pen test firms would be like, yeah, dude, whatever you need. If
Yep.
they're not saying, well, yeah, dude, whatever you need, then you might want to get a better pen test firm. And so, yeah, man, like you said,
Yep.
leverage that expertise. We see the same crap over and over and over again every single day. We
Yep.
can help you fix it, man.
Yep. Yeah, and the last thing with lack of resources, and we touched on it a little bit, kind of indirectly, but it's the capital, right? It's the capital
Yeah.
investment for new security products. Let's say you do a pen test and you're just using kind of like an antivirus product. Like maybe it's enterprise grade and it's like top tier antivirus, but maybe it's not a full-fledged EDR and it doesn't have the capabilities that you really need to respond to modern attacks, right? Maybe you can't, isolate hosts with it, and it doesn't feed into your SIM or whatever, there's no monitoring, whatever the case may be. Maybe you need some money for that. That's a difficult one, and that one leads to, is directly a leadership decision, right?
Yeah.
And in the sense that you need to prioritize where those dollars go. Maybe there's some things that you can kind of cut a little bit from a spending perspective in order to be able to afford, a new security product, or something like that. Or maybe there's some other initiatives somewhere else in the company that you can kind of trim as collectively as a leadership of an organization to be able to invest in those security initiatives. So that is very much a leadership thing, and I know something you have direct experience with as well.
Yeah, and coming from the industries that you and I came from, it's kind of hard to get our heads around limited resources when it comes to security stuff, because we had a bottomless budget for the most part. We get anything we needed to get it done, but I understand that's not the case everywhere. And this is something else that we've talked about previously, and that is leverage what you have to the maximum first
Yep.
before you go out and spend. Now, in your example of having limited functionality in a product, like if you do have enterprise AV versus EDR, you know that that's a spend problem. You're going to have to solve that with money.
Yep.
But a majority of the things that we find on, regardless of the type of pen testing that we're doing, you can leverage what you already have, and solve that problem. Whether it's virtual patching with a WAF, whether it's reconfiguring AD, whatever it may be. For the most part, you already have what you need to solve the
Yep.
problem, which gets into the next bullet point, which I'll let you lead on.
Yeah, and we did an episode on, I think, being resourceful or like using the tools that you have to its
Yeah.
maximum. And the story that I like to tell is we had an internal pen test with a client who was using their tools, the same tools that most other firms have, by the way, but they were using them in a way that was very creative and unique. And they ended up, catching a lot of the malicious activity that we did very early on. Like 5 minutes into the engagement, they're already, getting alerts and detecting our activity because they, one, understood their environment, testament to them, they understood their environment, but two, they were using the tools kind of above and beyond what everybody else was doing, right?
Yep.
They're like, well, I can do this with the tool, there's no reason I can't. It doesn't say I can't, it's not a stated feature of the tool, but I can use it in this way. And so they were using things that were really creative and really unique, to catch bad activity in their environment, being resourceful and using their tools to the max to get the most value out of them.
Absolutely, man. Completely agree. It's not usually a spent problem, or
Yep.
doesn't have. It doesn't have to be. That's the better way to say that.
Yep. Yeah, and it's all about being creative and resourceful, right? Like I've got certain amount of dollars, I got a certain amount of time. How can I be as resourceful as possible? Right.
Yep.
And I think that's a superpower in IT and security. It's like, can I make something out of nothing?
Yeah.
Right.
And the great thing about it is, yeah, you probably can. And there are resources out on the internet to either learn how to do it, or most of it
Yep.
you can just steal from GitHub, man. So
Yeah, man. The
lot
amount of
of
times I looked like a rock star because I took some open source tool and like used it. It's like just,
yep.
you know,
Yeah, same thing. I mean, half the time we customize, modify tools to fit our needs.
yep.
You guys can do that too.
It's like that meme where of Michael Scott shaking the hand of the manager. If you're familiar with that meme, and
Yes,
a lot of
yes.
people use it for like phishing emails. Like you're a good employee for not falling for phishing emails, and it's like me not answering any emails or not looking at any emails.
Yes, exactly, exactly.
So lack of expertise. That's the second one, right? So not enough people that know what to do and how to do it. So this is the problem where you have a certain amount of people, you have a team, but maybe they're not experts in Active Directory certificate services. So they don't know, what all those escalation issues are, or like what subject alternative names are, or what manager approval is, or all of those intricate things, right? And a lot of people before the research came out, the SpectreOps research, that showcased how to abuse this more easily. A lot of people were not kind of like quote unquote experts in this, right? They were not really looking for it, but this research came out, and then all of a sudden there was this boom in ADCS attacks. My point is, you're as an IT person or an IT director, like it's not your job to know ADCS intricately, right? You have to know everything. You have to know how to keep the lights on and keep the organization, moving. You might not have the intricate details of how to configure those things and how they could be abused, what misconfigurations look like, et cetera. So having the expertise is a big bottleneck as well that we see often.
No, I completely agree. And that extends to management, by the way. So back to the drum I said I was going to beat, I'm going to beat on a little bit more now. Management has to have enough expertise in understanding this stuff to know that they need to allocate resources or have that expertise in house. I would say the larger challenge that we see in many cases, maybe on mostly external pen tests is what comes to mind, is management just not understanding any of it.
Mhm.
And so in many cases, we have to teach them what it is that we're talking about. And in a lot of cases, we have to be able to communicate it in that kind of upper management risk language, if you will.
Yep.
And in fact, in a couple of weeks, I'll be going in front of one of our clients' audit boards and presenting our pen test findings in a management format so that they can correctly allocate resources and all that good stuff to help solve these problems. And that is the role of IT and security management, right? You guys should be able to take this pen test, translate it into upper executive speak so that you can, correctly communicate what that risk is. And I think that's a gap for a lot of organizations is maybe your IT staff are actual rock stars. Maybe
Mhm.
they're completely awesome at everything that they do, but they're getting misallocated at the management level, or they're not being provided the opportunities to expand their expertise, which we're going to talk about a little bit.
Yep.
So, as with a lot of other things, it kind of starts up here with the
Mhm.
management folks, and it kind of gets pushed down. So I would say I would put the onus of this back on the guys who are doing that and say, you need to be able to understand this stuff.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we've talked a little bit about, hiring out and kind of using third parties. That all fits well in this category or this bottleneck
Mhm.
as well, right? You can outsource the help or the expertise in many ways.
Oh yeah.
But also, I think what's important is like what you mentioned or alluded to is the retasking and retraining or just training in general, right? Maybe you don't take somebody from their day job as a sysadmin and convert them to security. Maybe you just provide them the training that they need to kind of learn some of this stuff.
Mhm.
And there's never been a better time to learn cybersecurity than now. There is
You're
so much
absolutely right.
affordable training. There is so much quality affordable training that it's crazy how much you can get with your for your money. That's extremely valuable training. But I think in my mind, it's less expensive to train your current staff, your current employees, than it is to hire out or to get some senior security person who knows everything, to hire a third party, et cetera. I think it's good for the employee, it's good for the organization. It shows that you're investing in them, and it's good for that person as well. And I think it's good all around to retask, retrain, and kind of use use those dollars to help those internal teams get a little bit better from a training perspective.
Absolutely, man. And I'll tell you, I've never met an IT person that would say no to, hey man, you want to learn some security stuff? Everybody's going to say yes to that, right? Everybody thinks it's cool, it's interesting. I mean, we've been doing it for our entire adult lives. We still think it's cool and interesting. And so, if you afford them that opportunity, most people, the vast majority, are going to be like, yeah, dude, I want in on that,
Yep.
right? Because they want to expand their horizons a little bit, learn new things. And ultimately, by the way, there's kind of a downstream effect of that you'll probably see less security issues if your IT admin folks are trained and
Yep.
understand security and risk. They're
Yep.
going to create less issues, right? And so, there's a tremendous amount of value, like you said, in training your people.
Yep.
And I think ultimately, at the end of the day, every IT person is a security person. They just may not realize it,
Yep.
right?
Yeah, and I think lack of expertise is honestly out of the three: lack of resources, lack of expertise, and lack of time. I think lack of resources is the easiest to fix
Yeah.
because you can't ever get more time back, right? Time is finite, right? We only get so much of it, and you only have so much of it on your team.
Yeah.
Lack of resources is the same. Like you only have the people that you have. You can hire out, right? But there's a limit to that. Lack of expertise, I think, is something that is the easiest because there are there's unlimited amount of people that have skill sets in these things that we're talking about.
Yep.
A lot of the stuff that we find on pen tests is not bleeding edge, like cutting edge stuff that's just brand new technique that got released. Like this stuff is tried and true, like Active Directory, internal networks, segmentation, vulnerabilities. Like this stuff is tried and true. And I think there's a lot of people that have expertise in this that can help many different firms in many different areas, whether you're just starting or if you're an enterprise and you need somebody really sophisticated. I think that's the easiest to solve.
Yeah, man. Well, and there are just tons of resources out there for your existing staff to leverage, right?
Mhm.
So like, man, we still see cross-site scripting. It's been 26 years, dude. And there are entire
Yep.
organizations, I'm looking at you, OWASP, who are dedicated to
Yep.
helping people solve this at no cost. They are open
Yep.
source, they're nonprofit organizations out there. There's
Yep.
just no excuse other than time and resource, right? Which I get, but like it's not for lack of available
Yep.
information
I have
that you
a
can get that skill set.
I have a funny anecdote. One of my old bosses used to say, any problem that's a money problem is not a problem. Like just throw money at it. And
Yeah,
I think there is some truth to that, right? If you have money, hire some experts to help,
yeah,
right? You know, don't be so you know stringent on spending money on external people out of just being proud of your team or whatever the case may be,
yeah,
right? If you have the dollars to spend, I think it's worth investing on the things that you've prioritized, right? It doesn't make sense to spend $1 million on something that doesn't matter.
yeah.
Um, so
But I think knowing what matters is probably the key thing there,
yeah,
right? because
Yep.
I'd like to think most of these organizations, if they are under regulation, if they are getting pen tests, I mean, you're paying a not small amount of money to get a penetration test.
Yep.
It's kind of silly not to spend a little bit more and fix the issues identified in the test, right?
And, foreshadowing to our next episode, that's going to be like, why do pen tests cost so much? There are a lot of reasons that pen tests cost so much that do not have any correlation to the amount of money you spend to pay a pen test firm to do the pen test. So
Yep.
just a
Yeah,
little
I'm excited
foreshadowing
about
for
that.
the
Yeah,
next
I'm excited
episode.
about that episode. That'll be good.
So the last kind of bottleneck I see often is lack of time. So you have money, you have people, but they're so busy doing other things, keeping the lights on, all the things we already said, that you might even have priorities, but they're just fourth, fifth, sixth on the priority list and not one, two, three, right?
Yeah.
So lack of time is a serious thing as well, and it correlates very closely with the other categories, obviously.
It does. It does. And, I'm going to beat on management again. Sorry, guys. But at the end of the day, I understand that we have this huge bucket of risk, right? This huge bucket of security tasks. So you've got, like you mentioned earlier, you're being audited. You've got vulnerability scans going on. You have business level risk. You also now have this pen test report that, Secure IT 360 has given you, and you got to figure out where that fits in all of these other priorities. So you have to allocate time to your folks based on where you think that risk lives in that in
Mhm.
that scale. Now I'm a little partial because this is our business, but pen test results should be pretty high up there, dude. you know
Yeah, and anecdotally, what we've seen, and I think you would probably agree with this, but let me know. The firms that take our pen test reports and immediately start working on the remediations are more likely to get those remediations completed in a given period of time than those who wait, several weeks and they're kind of working on other things, and then then they're going to get to it, right?
yep.
I think the trick is, if it's a trick, is to work on it immediately. Just spend some time, work on those things immediately, get some progress or get some momentum behind those remediations, get those projects going. They'll pick up some momentum, they'll pick up speed, hopefully, in the organization in terms of being important, or taking people's time and putting them behind that. And I think you're more likely to get those things done if you start working them on them sooner rather than waiting and having them draw out and kind of drawing that process out.
1,000% agree with that, right? The problem with, and it's not really a problem, I guess it's just more of a reality of being in the sysadmin IT world, is there's always going to be more stuff to do.
Mhm.
And I would also add to that that it should be no surprise to you that if you have a pen test scheduled next month, that immediately after that there's going to be some work to do, right?
Mhm.
Because it's pretty unusual for us to find nothing. So go ahead and anticipate that. Understand that there's going to be work to be done as a direct result of this thing
Yep.
that you're paying all this money to get done, and allocate time and resources and whatever
Yep.
you need to get those things resolved. And to kind of to continue the first point, if you do wait, let's say you say, oh, we're going to get to that 3 months from now because we got this other thing going on. Well, there's going to be something else, right?
Yep.
So, before you get to that, there's going to be some other urgent thing that's going to pop up, and it's going to slide a little bit more. The next thing you know, you're getting your next annual pen test, and nothing's fixed. And now we're
Yep.
back at the beginning of the episode of what we were talking about. So yeah, I completely agree, man. You know, jump on it as quickly as you can,
Yep.
right?
Another hack is just don't have vacation right after a pen test is done.
It's kind of
Which
funny you say that. That seems to happen a lot for some reason.
which is why the Q4 rush is so surprising to me, because it's Thanksgiving time, it's Christmas time, it's all the other holidays around this time. That if you do a pen test and then the next week or 2 weeks after your pen test you have Thanksgiving, it's like people are going to be out that whole week. And then if you do a pen test at the beginning of December, a lot of people take vacation around that time. So it's tough to have an engagement done and then have vacation or holidays right on the back of it. So I think being smart about when you do engagements is a little hack in of itself. So that can help free up, or it can work to your advantage, right? Like maybe that frees up time for your people who are not taking vacation or something, to be able to work on things that are not, continuous projects that they can't work on because other people are there. Maybe they can work on the remediation. So I think it can work both ways, but I think being mindful about it is really key.
Yeah, and look, man, you said something that really kind of sparked something in my mind with regards to the Q4 rush. Okay, so our listeners may not know what that is, so let's talk about that briefly. The Q4 rush for us is everybody wants their pen test to be done in Q4 because they have this annual requirement, whether that be policy driven or regulatory or whatever. So you have the entire calendar year to get this pen test done, and we have people come to us, no kidding, right now, going, "Hey, I need my annual pen test." And so it creates a bottleneck of resources for us because we only have so many people to do the work. But here's the caveat to that, right? I think that speaks to the mentality of why people are getting pen tested. And so what I mean by that
Mhm.
is if your intention is to identify issues and risk and solve them every calendar year, you'd be getting a pen test in July, right? You wouldn't be getting it in November and December because there's no flipping way you're going to solve all those issues by the end of the calendar year. So we have this mentality about pen testing that it's this checkbox that we need to get done because we said we would. But we're not really. It's kind of giving it lip service a little bit, right?
Yep.
And so we're not doing this because we intend to identify and resolve risk within our
Yep.
organization. We're doing it because we have to, which it's fine. I get that. I'm not hating on that,
Yep.
but let's back that up a little bit, right? And let's
Yep.
prioritize the resolution of the issues, not the
Yep.
execution of the test. And I think that speaks a lot to and kind of justifies our position of, hey, you're not
Yep.
prioritizing this stuff the way we think you should.
Yeah, and I think, as long as we're being, candid and talking about root cause of issues, I think that's important to discuss. Is like let's talk about the elephant in the room, and that many pen tests are compliance driven, and I think to get ahead of that and to free up resources and to have the time to invest in the people to have the expertise, you have to see it in a different way. And
Yeah.
I think that's ultimately what you're talking about, and
Yeah.
why I think this discussion is important. I hope it has resonated with some people listening, and if it has, let us know on social media or send us a message, send us an email if you agree, or what your thoughts are on this, because I think it is, out of everything, I think these kinds of conversations are the most important, right? We can
Yeah.
talk about certain vulnerabilities all we want. We can talk about 0 days and the stuff that's, kind of more bleeding edge happening in the news. CISA just released a list of the top exploited vulnerabilities in 2023, and no surprise, a lot of common faces there. But this stuff is the core. This is what makes security programs work and
Yep.
work well. Doing this stuff well, and making sure that these kinds of things are priorities. Kind of differentiates the good teams from the teams that are kind of just struggling to get by.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. All right, folks, that's all we have time for today. Thank you for listening and or watching, depending on how you're consuming this. If you enjoyed it, please share it with your friends. And if you want to work with us, there's a button on our offsec.blog site that you can check out. And there's some good material over there as well. We'll see you guys next Wednesday.